There are substances on earth that seem ordinary until heaven touches them. Salt is one of them. It sits quietly on every table, invisible in its simplicity. Yet in the language of the Torah, it carries the vibration of eternity. It was not man who created salt. It was formed in the first breath of the sea, in the tears of creation, in the covenant between heaven and earth. Before we begin, take a moment. If you are new here, subscribe to the channel Jewish Wisdom, because this project exists to revive the forgotten spiritual laws that still govern our lives. Each video you watch is a spark of ancient light returning to the world. Now write this phrase in the comments. I walk protected under the covenant of salt. That phrase is not a superstition. It's an alignment. You are declaring with your own words that you choose to live under the same eternal agreement that God made with His people, a covenant that cannot rot, decay, or be corrupted. But why salt? Why is this humble mineral mentioned again and again in Scripture? Why did God command that every offering on the altar must be seasoned with it? Why did the prophets call it a symbol of protection, permanence, and divine truth? You may think of salt as something that preserves food, but to the sages of Israel, salt preserves holiness. When a person leaves home in the morning, they step into a world filled with invisible currents, thoughts, words, glances, and energies that cling to the soul. In ancient times, Jews would sprinkle a small amount of salt near their doorway or carry it in their pockets, whispering the verse, "With all your offerings you shall offer salt." Leviticus 2:13. They believed that as long as the covenant of salt remained upon them, impurity could not attach itself. Imagine the scene. The desert wind sweeping through the camp, the priests ascending the altar, and a silver dish of salt gleaming beside the fire. Every sacrifice, every prayer touched by that eternal grain, not for flavor, but for remembrance, for covenant. This was not ritual magic. It was remembrance that God's promises, like salt, endure beyond corruption, that even when the world around us decays, His word does not. So before leaving home, before facing the noise, the eyes, the chaos, stop for a moment. Look at the salt on your table. Touch it. Remember that it is older than your fears, older than your enemies, older than the darkness itself. It is the memory of the sea before it was divided, the whisper of the covenant spoken before you were born. We are only beginning to uncover what the ancient sages knew about this element. In the next part, we will open the scrolls and explore the verses where the mystery of salt hides, from the altar of the temple to the words of the prophets. Stay with me. What you will learn next will change how you see something you've touched every day of your life. Long before men learned to preserve food, heaven had already chosen salt to preserve holiness. The sages say that every element in creation carries a divine echo, a purpose hidden beneath its form. Fire purifies, water gives life, air transmits spirit, and salt preserves. It does not allow what is pure to rot, nor what is sacred to fade. It stands as the memory of eternity inside matter itself. In the Torah, salt is not a condiment. It is a command. In Leviticus 2:13, God speaks, "And every offering of your meal offering shall you season with salt. Neither shall you allow the salt of the covenant of your God to be lacking from your offering. With all your offerings you shall offer salt." To the human ear it sounds poetic, but to the Hebrew mind, every word is a gate. The verse begins with kol korbancha, every offering, meaning not some, not most, but every single act of devotion. Salt must be present. In Hebrew, the word for salt is melach. Its letters, mem, lamed, chet, form the same numerical pattern as lacham, meaning to fight, to battle. To the mystics, this was no coincidence. Salt wages war against decay, corruption, and spiritual death. It stands between the sacred and the impure, between what lives and what falls apart. Now imagine the temple in Jerusalem. The air filled with the fragrance of burning incense, the murmurs of priests chanting psalms, and beside the altar, a dish of salt shining white against the bronze. Every sacrifice, before touching flame, first touched salt. because even fire needs preservation. Even devotion can rot when it forgets its covenant. Rabbi Akiva once taught, "The world exists by virtue of the covenant of salt." Why? Because salt, by its nature, cannot spoil. You can leave it under sun or storm, and it remains what it is. It absorbs, yet it does not change. It dries tears, cleanses wounds, preserves life. It represents a promise that cannot be broken, the same kind of promise God made with Israel. In Numbers 18:19, God says to Aaron, the high priest, "It is an everlasting covenant of salt before the Lord to you and to your descendants with you." The Hebrew term here, Brit Melach Olam, literally means an eternal covenant of salt. The rabbis explained that this covenant was given to the priesthood as a sign of unbreakable continuity. Just as salt cannot lose its essence, the priestly covenant would not lose its holiness. But there is a deeper secret here, hidden in plain sight. The Zohar, the mystical commentary on the Torah, reveals that salt is born from the union of water and fire. When seawater meets the heat of the sun, salt crystallizes. It is the marriage of opposites, of mercy and judgment, of giving and restraint, of heaven and earth. That is why the Kabbalists say that salt is the perfect balance of divine energies. It carries the masculine and the feminine, the upper and lower worlds, harmonized in a single grain. When the priests placed salt on the offerings, they were not seasoning flesh. They were symbolically binding the visible to the invisible, uniting the world below with the world above. Salt became a bridge, a physical trace of a spiritual law. And because of that, salt has always been used as a boundary. In ancient Jewish homes, when a new house was built, the family would scatter salt on the threshold and recite blessings from the Psalms. The Lord preserves the faithful. When guests were received at the table, bread was dipped in salt, not butter, to remember that even joy must rest upon covenant. At the Sabbath table, Jews still do this every Friday night. As the challah is lifted, the family dips it in salt 3 times, echoing the sacrifices of the temple. Why? Because the table of every home is now the altar of every heart. The sages said, "When the temple was destroyed, the table of a man became his altar, and salt remained as a witness of that eternal truth." Think of it this way. Salt connects the temple and your home, the priesthood and your daily bread. It means that no matter where you are, holiness can dwell in the ordinary. The grain of salt on your table is a reminder that the presence of God is not locked inside temples. It's waiting wherever covenant is remembered. But the covenant of salt also has a warning. When one forgets it, corruption enters. Lot's wife turned into a pillar of salt, not because she was cursed, but because she broke alignment. She looked back at the world of impurity with longing, and the very element that preserves became her judgment. Salt, once a blessing, became her mirror. She became frozen in what she refused to leave behind. The Talmud comments on this. Where there is no salt, corruption reigns. This is not only physical, it is moral, spiritual, emotional. Without salt, without remembrance of covenant, relationships decay, words lose truth, devotion becomes ritual, and souls forget their source. That is why, even today, many Jews place a pinch of salt in water before washing their hands in the morning. It's not superstition, it's alignment. In Kabbalah, the morning hand-washing, Netilat Yadayim, removes the residue of impurity that clings to the body during sleep. The addition of salt amplifies that cleansing, invoking the Brit Melach, the eternal covenant that repels decay. When you do this before leaving home, you are symbolically sealing yourself, body and soul, under that same promise, that no spiritual impurity can attach itself to you. You carry a piece of the temple with you into the world. Do you see how this shifts everything? You no longer live randomly. You walk under a covenant that was spoken before time. When you sprinkle salt on your meal, you are participating in the same act the priests performed on the altar. When you dip your bread on Shabbat, you are sealing a promise older than nations. When you keep salt in your home, You are declaring that holiness will not rot inside your walls. But salt's protection is not automatic. The rabbis taught that salt preserves only what is alive in spirit. If your heart is dry, it cannot preserve anything. So when you use it, before leaving home, before eating, before praying, remember that it is not the mineral that guards you, but the covenant behind it. Salt without faith is just stone, but faith with salt is unbreakable. This is why, in Jewish mysticism, salt is one of the 4 earthly elements said to be linked to the attribute of gevurah, strength, discipline, boundaries. When you align with it, you are declaring boundaries between you and the chaos outside. You are saying, "Here ends what can harm me. Beyond this grain begins what belongs to God." Even Yeshua, Jesus of Nazareth, who spoke within the same Jewish world, referred to this mystery when he said, "You are the salt of the earth." It was not a metaphor for kindness. It was a calling to covenant. He meant, preserve truth, stand uncorrupted. Let your presence stop decay wherever you walk. Because salt without its essence, if the salt loses its flavor, symbolizes faith without spirit, religion without heart. And once that happens, nothing can preserve it anymore. So before leaving home, when you touch the salt, do not think of protection as superstition. Think of it as remembrance. You are reminding the world and your own soul, "I walk in the covenant that cannot decay." This is why the sages would say before traveling, "May the covenant of salt guard your steps." They meant, may you stay aligned, uncorrupted, and faithful, wherever you go. Everything God created has a visible and invisible side. Salt may seem small, but it is one of the few things on earth that cannot be destroyed by time. Burn it, freeze it, dissolve it, and it returns, reforming in the same purity. It is incorruptible, just like the soul, and that, my friend, is why the righteous are compared to salt. Because no matter what fire or storm they face, they remain who they are. They preserve the divine essence in a world that constantly decays. We'll now move deeper, from understanding to living it. In the next part, we'll explore how to make this teaching a daily spiritual practice. The ancient way to use salt as a symbol of blessing, purification, and alignment before stepping into the world. What was once ritual will become revelation. Stay close. The mystery is only beginning to unfold. There is a moment before dawn fully awakens, when the air is still heavy with mystery. In that fragile silence, between sleep and movement, ancient wisdom teaches that what you do first shapes the energy of your entire day. That is why, in the Jewish tradition, the first act upon rising is not to speak, not to check messages, not even to think of work, but to purify the hands. The sages called this netalat yadayim, the lifting of the hands. It is not simply washing, it is a sacred reset. During sleep, the soul travels through invisible realms, leaving traces of spiritual residue upon the body. When the person wakes, the hands, tools of action, must be cleansed before they touch the world. And here lies the secret of salt. In the mystical writings, the combination of water and salt was described as a small mirror of the Red Sea itself. When Israel crossed those waters, the waves formed a wall on both sides, a boundary between death and life, bondage and freedom. When you wash your hands with salt in the morning, you are not performing superstition. You are reenacting that passage. You are symbolically walking through the sea that separates darkness from light. So, how is it done? The ancients used to keep a small bowl near the entrance or in the kitchen, filled with clean water. Into it, they would drop a few grains of natural salt. As the salt dissolved, they whispered the verse from Psalm 24, "Who shall ascend the mountain of the Lord? He who has clean hands and a pure heart." Then, before leaving home, they would dip their fingers lightly and wash their hands, not hurriedly, but with intention. Every drop symbolized release from impurity, every movement a silent prayer. May I act today only with clean hands and a true heart. In that gesture, a cosmic truth was hidden. Purity is not a condition. It is a decision repeated daily. When you understand this, every grain of salt becomes sacred. You begin to see that physical rituals are not relics. They are reminders. They awaken the memory of covenant. To apply this teaching, you do not need a temple, only awareness. Place a small pinch of salt beside your sink or doorway. Before leaving your house, touch it with reverence. Whisper within yourself, I walk under divine preservation. Nothing impure can cling to me. You may write this phrase in the comments now, not as routine, but as declaration. Every time someone writes those words, it becomes a public affirmation that covenant still lives in the world. And when you walk out into the day, remember that your home itself has become a small temple. The Torah calls every Jewish house a mikdash me'at, a miniature sanctuary. Within its walls, meals become offerings and words become prayers. The salt on your table is the same salt that stood beside the altar. When you share bread with someone, dip it in salt before giving, not because of taste, but because it seals blessing. The sages taught that salt has two powers. It preserves and it purifies. Preservation means remembering the good, keeping holiness alive even in daily chaos. Purification means releasing what decays, anger, envy, resentment, guilt. When you use salt consciously, you are not only protecting your body, you are cleansing your emotions. Try this simple practice. At the end of a difficult day, when you feel burdened by words, energy, or worry, fill a small bowl with warm water and add a pinch of salt. Place your hands inside, close your eyes, and imagine that all heaviness is dissolving, returning to the sea from which it came. Then say quietly, just as salt returns to the ocean, may all impurity return to its source. May my soul be clear again. It is a way of aligning yourself with the ancient current of renewal. The Talmud records a story about a righteous woman who always kept salt by her door. When asked why, she answered, because the enemy of the soul never enters where covenant is remembered. Her neighbors laughed, but her home was known for its peace. The rabbis later commented, where the covenant of salt is kept, discord cannot dwell. This is not metaphor, it is spiritual law. Salt, in its silence, embodies boundaries. It says, this belongs to God, this does not. And if you carry that consciousness, evil truly cannot touch you, because you are not vibrating at its level. In the physical world, boundaries protect property. In the spiritual world, they protect identity. Salt teaches us to draw these invisible lines, between what feeds the soul and what drains it, between sacred speech and idle chatter, between discipline and chaos. That is why Yeshua said, have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. He was not speaking of minerals, he was speaking of awareness. To have salt in yourself means to live with spiritual definition, to know who you are and whose you are. When you apply this to daily life, everything changes. You stop walking unconsciously. You begin to act, speak, and even think with sacred awareness. Each morning becomes a reenactment of covenant. Each night a return to it. Salt, before leaving home, is therefore a spiritual seal. You are saying to the unseen world, I walk in the covenant that cannot decay. I belong to the light that cannot be corrupted. The mystics compared this act to the mezuzah, the small parchment fixed on Jewish doorposts. Both are thresholds. Both declare the same truth. This house belongs to God. When you wash your hands with salt, you are not performing a superstition. You are inscribing your own doorway, invisible yet eternal. There is another secret practice rarely spoken today, the covenant circle. Before major journeys, the ancients would draw a small circle of salt near the door, reciting the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. They did not believe the salt itself created protection. It was the unity behind the act, the declaration that nothing outside of divine oneness could dominate their path. The salt was simply a physical echo of that unity. You can do this too, not as ritual, but as remembrance. When fear arises, when you sense confusion around you, Trace a small invisible circle in the air with your hand and whisper within, "Only light surrounds me. Only covenant defines me." The more you live this way, the more natural it becomes. You will feel when energies shift. You will sense peace returning like the tide. This is the path of spiritual practice taught by the sages, to turn every object into a reminder of divine reality. The bread on your table, the water you drink, the salt you touch, all are invitations to consciousness. To the mind, this may sound symbolic, but to the soul, it is nourishment. Because when you live in remembrance, the world stops being ordinary. You begin to perceive the divine design hidden beneath every grain of existence. There is a beautiful saying in the Midrash: "The righteous are like salt. They do not change, but they change everything they touch." That is the secret we are called to embody. So before leaving home tomorrow, take a single moment. Stand still, place your hand near the salt and say softly, "I am preserved by the covenant of the eternal." Then step out. Walk as if every street is sacred ground. Speak as if your words could season the air with truth. Live as if your very presence keeps decay away, because it does. You are not merely using salt. You are remembering who you are, whose covenant you belong to, and what light you carry. And when you remember, evil truly cannot touch you, not because it disappears, but because you no longer dwell in the same vibration. You stand in a higher frequency, one that darkness cannot breathe in. This is how the ancients lived. This is how holiness entered their homes, their meals, their travels. They understood that every act done in remembrance becomes a shield. From today on, let your mornings be marked by that small act. Let it remind you of the unbreakable covenant between Creator and creation, the salt of the earth and the soul. Write this now in the comments as a declaration of faith. The covenant of salt protects my path. Let those words be your seal, invisible but unshakable. Night was falling over Jerusalem. The sky glowed with a deep copper light, the kind that looks like time itself is burning away. Down one of the narrow stone alleys, an old rabbi walked slowly, his tallit folded over his arm, his steps measured like the rhythm of a prayer. In his other hand, he carried a small pouch of salt. Every evening, after teaching in the synagogue, he would stop at the same place, a small archway where a widow sold bread. She had little, yet she always smiled when she saw him coming. "Shalom, Rabbi," she would say, handing him a piece still warm from the oven. And he, without fail, would take a pinch of salt from his pouch and sprinkle it over the bread before breaking it. One night, a young man from the neighborhood followed him and asked, "Master, why do you always add salt to the bread? It is already good. Are you afraid of evil spirits?" The old man smiled gently. "I do not fear evil, my son, but I remember. Salt keeps memory alive. When I add it to my bread, I remind the world that the covenant between heaven and earth still stands. Without remembrance, even goodness rots." He broke the bread, handed half to the boy, and continued. "Every time I taste salt, I remember that God's promises do not spoil. We humans forget easily. Salt does not. That is why we use it, to remember what we would otherwise lose." The boy looked puzzled. "But what does salt have to do with me? I am not a priest." The rabbi turned toward him, his eyes reflecting the last light of day. "You are a priest of your own life. Every word you speak is an offering. Every act you do is placed on the altar of time. Salt your actions with covenant, and they will endure beyond death." That night, the young man went home in silence. His father had died months earlier. His house felt empty, hollow. As he placed a loaf of bread on the table, he remembered the rabbi's words. He took a pinch of salt, sprinkled it on top, and whispered, "For the covenant that cannot decay." For the first time in months, peace filled the room. Not noise, not excitement, but a quiet, sacred presence. Something invisible had entered the space. It was as if the ancient temple had descended for a moment onto that wooden table. He understood then what the sages meant when they said, "Where covenant is remembered, the Shekinah, The divine presence dwells. This is what Jewish wisdom truly teaches, that God does not live in faraway heavens. He lives wherever we create remembrance. The covenant of salt was never about the mineral. It was about memory made visible. In our modern world, we have forgotten this language. We live surrounded by noise, speed, distraction. We cross the threshold of our homes without blessing. We eat without gratitude. We work without awareness. And so, the sacred slips through our fingers like water, but the soul still remembers. Somewhere deep within, you have not forgotten the covenant. That is why the simplest things, the scent of bread, the taste of salt, the silence of morning, awaken something ancient in you. They remind you of home, of a peace that existed before fear, before struggle. The Torah says, "You are the salt of the earth." To the sages, this meant, "You are the preservers of holiness in the world. You are the reason corruption does not win." You, with your faith, your remembrance, your small daily acts of devotion, are what keeps divine order alive amidst chaos. When you wake in the morning and dip your hands into salted water, you are performing more than a ritual. You are holding back the tide of decay that tries to overtake the soul of the world. When you sprinkle salt before leaving your home, you are drawing an invisible circle of covenant around your day. This is not about superstition or fear. It is about standing as a guardian of the invisible. Because in truth, holiness has always needed protectors. The mystics taught that salt belongs to the Gevurah, the divine attribute of strength, the force that sets limits so that life can flourish. Without boundaries, even light becomes chaos. Salt says, "Here ends corruption. Here begins holiness." When you remember that, your entire life changes. Imagine this for a moment. Every morning, before stepping out, you pause. You touch the salt, not mindlessly, but consciously. You whisper, "I am bound to the eternal. My steps are sealed in covenant." Then you leave your home. The air outside feels the same. The streets are noisy, the world chaotic, yet something in you has shifted. You walk as if the ground recognizes your alignment. You carry peace where there was anxiety. You bring order into the noise. You preserve what is pure. That is what it means to be the salt of the earth. In the ancient temple, salt was placed beside the fire. It never burned. It simply remained, a witness to every offering consumed by flame. Fire transforms. Salt endures. The combination of both created balance, transformation without loss. The same is true for you. The fire of life will consume many things, relationships, dreams, even bodies. But if you live in remembrance, your essence, your salt, will endure. You will not be destroyed by change. You will preserve the divine spark within you through every trial. This is why, when you feel broken, you must return to the covenant. Touch the salt. Remember the promise. You are not meant to decay in pain. You are meant to preserve light through it. One evening, long after the old rabbi had passed away, the young man, now aged himself, repeated the same gesture with his own grandson. He sprinkled salt over bread, broke it, and said, "Taste this. It is what kept our people alive." The child asked, "Is it magic?" The old man laughed. "No. It's memory. Magic fades, but memory endures." And that, my friend, is the true miracle of salt. It does not perform wonders outside of you. It awakens the wonder within you that never dies. When you use salt before leaving home, you are not trying to control destiny. You are synchronizing with divine design. You are saying, "I choose preservation over corruption, remembrance over forgetfulness, covenant over chaos." Do not think of this as a relic of the past. The covenant of salt is as alive now as it was in the days of Aaron. Its power does not age. The same words spoken in the desert echo still. With all your offerings, you shall offer salt. Because every act of love, every prayer, every word of truth you offer today is an offering, and every offering must be preserved. That is why God commanded salt, so that nothing holy would be wasted. The sages taught that even the smallest act done in covenant echoes in eternity. When you bless your meal, when you forgive someone, when you speak truth, these acts are eternal grains of salt scattered through time. They preserve goodness so that future generations can still taste holiness in the world. So let this be your new practice, your quiet revolution against forgetfulness. Each morning, cleanse your hands with salt and water, speak your intention, remember who you are. Before leaving home, touch the salt, whisper your covenant. When you eat, dip your bread in salt, seal the blessing. When night comes, let the taste of salt remind you that the eternal still dwells within you. And in all of it, write within your heart this sentence: I am preserved by the covenant that cannot decay. Write it now in the comments. Let your declaration become part of the living chain of remembrance. If you wish to go deeper into these teachings, to understand the mystical roots of Jewish wisdom, its symbols and its timeless practices, ask in the comments for the Jewish Wisdom eBook. Inside it, you'll find the hidden meanings of the ancient elements, salt, light, oil, and water, and how they mirror the spiritual architecture of the soul. Because learning is also an offering, and wisdom, like salt, preserves the world. Let this truth settle in you. You are not fighting darkness. You are preserving light. You are not escaping evil. You are remembering holiness. And remembrance is stronger than fear. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine your home glowing softly from within, an unseen light guarding your threshold, your path marked by the eternal covenant. You step out, and the air feels alive, responsive. Every step is guided, every breath seasoned with purpose. You feel the invisible bond that ties heaven and earth together through your own awareness. That is the mystery of salt. It does not shout, it simply is. Silent, incorruptible, faithful. It is what faith looks like in matter. And now, as you finish hearing these words, remember the beginning. Use salt like this, and evil can't touch you. But now you understand why. Because salt, touched by remembrance, becomes holiness itself. Walk, then, as one who carries the covenant. Let your life be seasoned with wisdom. Let your hands bless, your words preserve, your presence bring peace. And whenever you touch salt again, in your kitchen, your table, your journey, pause for 1 second and whisper to yourself, like a seal of light upon your soul, I am part of the covenant that cannot decay. That is your protection. That is your remembrance. That is your blessing, forever.